I want to tell you about a Tuesday that had nothing special about it on paper. No emergency, no bad news, no dramatic phone call. Just me, standing in my kitchen at 11 p.m., doing dishes that had been sitting there since dinner because I hadn't had 10 free minutes since 6 a.m. And somewhere between the third plate and the fourth, I started crying. Not because of the dishes, because I just remembered our car needed a repair that was going to cost around $400, and I already knew, without even opening the banking app, that we didn't have $400 sitting anywhere waiting for that. That was the night I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding for months. We weren't broke because we didn't make enough money. We were broke because we had built zero systems to catch us when something ordinary and expensive happened, which in a house with a baby happens more often than anyone warns you about. So today, I want to walk through the entire 11-month journey, start to finish, of building an actual $1,000 emergency fund starting with $25, every setback included, because the setbacks are the part these stories usually leave out, and they're the part that actually matters if you're going to try this yourself. The starting point. I want to be specific here because vague numbers don't help anybody. We were a single-income household at that point, my husband was between jobs, and our monthly budget had exactly nothing extra in it most months. Not because we were reckless, we weren't eating out, we weren't buying anything unnecessary, we were just stretched completely flat. So when I decided to start an emergency fund, I did not start with some inspiring $500 deposit. I started by opening a separate savings account, one that wasn't linked to my debit card, so I couldn't accidentally spend from it while distracted, and I set up an automatic transfer of $25 a week, timed to hit the account the same day my husband's unemployment payment landed, before we had a chance to see that money as spendable. Week 1 felt embarrassing, if I'm honest. $25 felt so small compared to the $400 repair looming over us that some part of me wondered why I was even bothering. But I kept coming back to one idea that changed how I saw the whole thing. A $25 cushion isn't supposed to solve a $400 problem. It's supposed to be the first brick in a wall that eventually will. Picture building a wall one single brick at a time, knowing the wall isn't useful yet, but trusting that bricks eventually become a wall if you don't stop laying them. Weeks 2 through 5 were honestly uneventful, and I think that's worth saying out loud too. Nothing dramatic happened. I didn't feel a rush of accomplishment. I just watched a number slowly climb from 25 to 50 to 75 to 100. And most weeks, I genuinely forgot the transfer was even happening, which turned out to be exactly the point. The system was working quietly in the background without needing my willpower involved every single day. The first real test came at week 6. My son came down with an ear infection that needed 2 different prescriptions in the same week, plus an urgent care visit that wasn't fully covered by insurance. At that point, I had $150 saved. It didn't cover everything, but it covered enough that we didn't have to put the entire cost on a credit card, which is what would have happened 3 months earlier. That was the first moment the fund actually did its job, and it didn't feel like winning the lottery. It felt like quietly avoiding a mess, which turned out to be exactly the point. If this kind of story is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe now, because I share these real numbers and real setbacks every week, not just the highlight reel version, the setback nobody plans for. Around month 3, my husband got a part-time job, and the very first thing I wanted to do with that extra income was stop the automatic transfer and finally breathe a little. I want to be honest, I paused it for exactly 1 pay period, told myself it was temporary, and immediately felt that familiar looseness creep back into our spending. An extra takeout order here, a slightly nicer grocery trip there, nothing dramatic, just enough to quietly absorb the extra income before it ever reached savings. I turned the automatic transfer back on within 2 weeks because I recognized the pattern before it became permanent. But I want you to know that setback happened because most of these stories skip that part entirely and make it sound like a straight line up. It wasn't a straight line. It was 2 steps forward, 1 step sideways, more than once. Month 4 brought a smaller test, one I almost don't count because it felt so minor at the time. But looking back, it mattered. A friend's baby shower came up, gift, outfit, gas money to drive there, all together landing around $60 I hadn't planned for. In the past, an unplanned $60 would have gone straight onto a credit card without a second thought. This time, I pulled it from the fund, watched the balance dip, and then watched myself immediately want to refill it faster the following weeks. That reaction surprised me. Protecting the fund had started to feel automatic, almost the way protecting a pet or a plant feels automatic once you've been responsible for it a while. By month 5, the account was sitting around $600, and something shifted in how it felt to check the balance. Instead of avoiding the banking app the way I used to, I started opening it on purpose. Sometimes just to look at the number, the same way you'd check on a plant you've been watering to see if it finally grew. That shift, from avoidance to genuine curiosity about my own money, ended up mattering almost as much as the dollar amount itself. Month 6 tested something different: patience rather than emergencies. Watching $600 sit there while other bills were tight was its own kind of hard. There were at least 2 weeks where I seriously considered pulling from it just to make an otherwise tight grocery month feel more comfortable. Not for an emergency, just for relief. I didn't. Mostly because I made myself wait 24 hours before deciding. The same rule I use for impulse purchases. And by the next day, the urge had usually faded enough to leave the fund alone. The second real test came at month 7, and this one was bigger. Our refrigerator died completely, no warning, just stopped cooling overnight, and we needed a replacement within days because we couldn't keep rebuying groceries every other day. The cost came in at just over $500 for a basic working model. At that point, I had roughly $700 saved. I want to walk through exactly how that moment felt, because it's different from what I expected. There was no triumphant feeling of being a financial genius. There was a much quieter feeling, almost relief mixed with disbelief, the specific sensation of solving a $500 problem without a single phone call to a credit card company, without a single sleepless night doing interest rate math, without a single argument about whose fault the emergency was. We paid for the fridge, the account dropped back down to under $200, and I remember feeling almost proud of watching that number shrink, because shrinking on purpose, for a real reason, is a completely different feeling than watching money disappear with no explanation. Rebuilding after that felt different too. The first time around, saving felt like an experiment I wasn't sure would work. The second time, after watching it actually catch something real, it felt like maintenance on something I already trusted. That mental shift from hoping the system works to knowing the system works is the actual turning point in this whole story, more than any single dollar amount. Month 8 and 9 were quiet rebuilding months, and I want to mention them specifically because quiet months rarely make it into these kinds of videos, even though they're most of what actually happens. No emergencies, no windfalls, just $25 a week landing on schedule, the balance climbing back up past $300, then $400, then $500 again. There's a kind of boredom to good financial systems that I think we don't talk about enough. The goal isn't excitement, the goal is a number that goes up reliably, whether or not anything interesting is happening in your life that week. Month 10 brought one more small test. A coworker of my husband's needed a ride to the airport at an odd hour and offered $40 gas money that never actually got paid. A tiny frustration, but the kind of small financial letdown that used to spiral into a whole afternoon of resentment for me. This time it barely registered because $40 wasn't going to make or break anything anymore. That's a strange kind of freedom that doesn't get talked about enough. Small financial disappointments losing their emotional weight simply because you have enough cushion that they no longer threaten anything important. By month 11, we crossed $1,000, And I want to be clear about what that milestone did and didn't change. It didn't change our income. It didn't erase the tight months that still happened regularly. What it changed was the specific kind of fear that used to show up every time something broke or got sick or needed replacing. That particular flavor of dread, the one that whispers, "This is going to wreck everything," quieted down considerably. Because for the first time there was an actual answer waiting behind it instead of just panic. Here's what I'd tell the version of me standing in that kitchen at 11 p.m. if I could go back. The amount you start with does not matter nearly as much as whether you start at all. $25 a week sounds almost insultingly small next to a real emergency. And it is small, right up until the 11th month, when it quietly isn't anymore. The setbacks are normal. Pausing for a pay period and restarting doesn't erase your progress. It's just part of how real saving actually happens outside of highlight reels. The boring months matter just as much as the dramatic ones, maybe more, because they're most of the actual timeline. And the biggest shift isn't the bank balance at all, it's the moment checking your account stops feeling like opening a wound and starts feeling like checking on something you're proud of. If you're standing in your own version of that kitchen right now, staring at a repair bill or a doctor's visit you can't fully cover, I'm not going to tell you to save $5,000 this month. I'm going to tell you to open one account tomorrow and move $25 into it before you have time to talk yourself out of it. That's genuinely the whole first step. Everything else in this story, the ear infection, the dead fridge, the slow, boring months in between, all came after that one small, almost embarrassing decision. I think about that woman crying over the dishes sometimes, and I wish I could hand her this exact video instead of making her wait 11 months to find out it was going to be okay. If this helped even one of you take that first $25 step today, then this channel did exactly what I built it to do. I'll see you in the next one.